Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So if you watched a previous video of mine where I discuss how they're trying to overturn the Chevron ruling, you probably remember how I was saying that carriers are often at a disadvantage. Today I want to talk about what has been happening recently in the trucking industry, and you guys tell me, is the trucking game quote unquote fair? Ready? Let's go! So first, let's talk about the fact that carriers and truckers are pretty much the scapegoats of this industry. Wow, that was a hard word to pronounce. But there was a situation that happened in 2014, which resulted in a case called the Blake versus Werner Industries case. So what happened? A driver team made up of a trainer and trainee picked up a load from Dallas that was delivering in California. Now they looked at the weather and they saw that on their way there is going to be freezing rain. And what they tried to do is they tried to make sure not to get into that inclement weather. Unfortunately, they failed. Now the trainee was the one at the wheel when they ended up hitting this freezing rain. But safety first, what he did was he slowed down to 45 miles per hour in a zone that had a speed limit of 65 miles per hour. Now, this driver team was heading westbound, of course. At the same time, there was a regular car that was heading eastbound in the same area. Well, that regular little car ended up losing control due to the inclement weather, even though they were on the other side of the freeway, right? They're heading eastbound, the truck is heading westbound. That car spun out of control at 50 miles per hour, crossed the median, and skidded all the way to the westbound traffic. And what happened? That car that spun out of control and kind of flew over the median ended up crashing into this truck. Now, the accident was horrific. It was tragic. A child passed away who was 7 years old. Everyone else had pretty major injuries, including brain injury and so on and so forth. Now, the surviving mother of the child who ended up losing his life, she happened to be a passenger in the vehicle too. She decided to sue both the drivers who were driving that truck as well as Werner Enterprises. Now, it should come as no surprise that when a Texas trooper came to evaluate what happened during the accident, he ruled that this was an actual accident, that the truckers were not at fault. After all, they were going westbound, they were below the speed limit, and they can't control the fact that a car from the other side spun out and kind of went into their lane. And a higher ranking trooper also agreed that this was purely an accident. Okay, now that we know the story, let's talk about the verdict. Well, the jury decided that despite the fact that the two drivers in that truck were below speed limit, despite the fact that they were crashed into from oncoming traffic, the jury decided that the crash was the fault of the truck driver who was driving, the trainee, as well as Werner Enterprises. Now, I quote here, "The Werner truck," the jury concluded, "simply should not have been where it was and going as fast as it was going because, well, there was a lot of evidence that seemed to say so, lots and lots." Basically, they ended up holding Werner Enterprises, the carrier, 70% liable for the crash. The driver, the trainee who was behind the wheel of the truck, they held him 14% liable. And the driver who was in the small vehicle who spun out of control, they ended up holding him 16% liable. And the reasoning that the jury gave was they believed that the driver of the truck, the trainee, was not trained well enough by Werner and that he should have pulled over on the side of the road somewhere. Now, the question is, was this appealed? Well, heck yeah, it was appealed. I mean, it sounds insane. They're calling this a nuclear verdict, right? So it was appealed, but the problem is that the judges ruled 5-4 to uphold the original verdict, which basically says Werner Enterprises is responsible for this crash. Now the case is pending the Texas Supreme Court decision. So now, after hearing this story, you guys tell me, in what world can you hold someone accountable for an accident when, number one, this person was driving way below the speed limit because of the inclement weather, and number two, a car literally flew from the other side of the freeway going in a different direction and crashed into you? It's insanity. So when I say that carriers and truckers really do get the short end of the stick, I mean it, and I'm sure that most of you will agree with me. Let's look at the facts. Accident happens, trucker gets blamed most of the time, regardless of the circumstances. Late for delivery, trucker gets blamed, and sometimes payment is withheld or cut because of the late delivery. The fact that the shipper took 15 hours to load does not matter at all. If the same trucker tries not to be late for delivery because they don't want their rate cut and either speeds a little bit or uses personal conveyance or whatnot and gets caught, guess what? That goes on your record. If your truck is overweight, guess what? It is your fault. And it doesn't matter the fact that the shipper's scale was completely uncalibrated. This is a true story that happened to us a few weeks ago where the shipper scale was uncalibrated. We got pulled over into the weight station and they told us we cannot move until we restructure the load on the axles, which means that we had to spend $700 on the forklift service. And another story that just happened today. Today is Friday. I grabbed a load for one of my guys. He goes to get loaded. The load on the paperwork is saying that it's much heavier than what we agreed to, and the shipper proceeds to tell him that if he is overweight, they're not taking a single thing off. They'll just cancel the load altogether, which means our weekend is lost. Thankfully, he was not overweight, but the point is the mentality, right? Or here's another one that happened just yesterday. You are a trucker, you're parked on a public road waiting to go to the receiver to get unloaded because they told you to come back in 30 minutes from now and there is no truck stop in sight. So you find a place where there are no signs saying that you can't park there. And then some Yahoo, whose property happens to be next to that public road, is very offended that there is a truck next to, not on, next to his property. So he calls the police and the police come and they proceed to tell you that there used to be a no parking sign here, but it was knocked down. Are we supposed to be psychics here? And almost all of this nonsense gets reflected in one way or another on your record, whether it's the CSA score, your personal CDL driving record, or perhaps a freight guard report. And when you do end up getting these violations, guess what? You are labeled now as an unsafe carrier. And who in the world wants to work with an unsafe carrier, right? Now, there are folks who start telling me when I start complaining about the way things are that if I don't like the rules or I don't like the game, I should get out. And that always reminds me of a story. My father-in-law, may he rest in peace, a Jersey-born man, old school guy, cojones made of steel kind of guy, used to have a you stamp. Whenever he got any document related to his business that he deemed to be blatantly stupid, he would take that stamp a big red you on the document and return it to sender. Now, I don't have a stamp, and even if I did, I am just not as brave as my father-in-law used to be. But just like him, I will question everything that I deem to be ridiculous. And the amount of responsibility put on a trucker, regardless of circumstances, is, in my opinion, ridiculous. That's all I have to say about it. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening to me vent. I'm super curious to hear about your thoughts on this topic, especially the nuclear verdict where they blamed the trucker and the carrier for the accident that happened. Really curious to read your thoughts on that. And yeah, I wish you guys an amazing weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.